Welcome. This is Dialogues of Plato's Complete Works podcast. Today is January 31, 2021. This episode is audio recording of a live meetup group. We meet through Toronto Philosophy Meetup, Calgary Philosophy Meetup, and Online Rebels Meetup. I am Eva Ellis. I'll be coordinating this live meeting and audio recording. And I'm so excited to pass the screen or the microphone to James Myers, who will be sharing his teachings and facilitating the participant conversation as well. James?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here in the first podcast episode. And I think especially because Plato is so accessible, I think that, we needn't worry about there being right or wrong answers. It really is, I think, all about the dialogue that we engage in among ourselves. And, here we are about 2,400 years after Plato was writing his dialogues. And I just think he would be so thrilled that, we are having our own dialogue about the kind of scenes and themes that he presented. Certainly Plato doesn't really tell us what we should think. He never really takes a position, and it's one of those things that maybe frustrates newcomers to Plato, is that they get to the end of the dialogue that they're reading and they don't find the answer. They're looking for the answer. Plato says we should think this. Well, Plato never says we should think this. I think it's more that Plato just kind of tells us how we should approach thinking itself. And certainly dialogue is a significant aspect of that, and something that he promoted all through his works. And so here we are. This is our 8th dialogue that we've done through the meetup group. And a very important dialogue, I think, extremely important, because it's really about it's got a number of themes. It actually starts by touching on some of the themes that Plato brings to us in maybe one of his most famous works, The Republic. Then he touches on the legend of Atlantis, which is certainly gripped human imagination for the 2,400 years. In fact, I turned on the television on Friday night and there was William Shatner's Unexplained series and a whole hour-long episode on where is Atlantis? So there's still people around the world looking for the lost continent of Atlantis. And here we are with Atlantis being treated in the very first few pages of the Timaeus. So it's certainly, continuing of relevance and certainly very accessible. I mean, it's I think we can read the dialogue, we can imagine ourselves, picture ourselves in the scenario, and look at the words that Plato's writing and think about their meaning and form our own meaning in them. My own beginning with Plato was, back when I was doing a pretty intensive self-study in physics, and a friend pulled out a dog-eared, well-worn book that a school person had used from a book bin. It was a printed copy of Plato's Meno, and it was filled with handwritten notes. I guess this person had been studying using this particular thing, and when they finished, they put it in a book bin at the end of their yard and just free for the public to take. And so my friend took it and gave me the Meno, and I read it, and it's one of Plato's shorter dialogues, and I was gripped. The logic just seemed to speak very much, and that dialogue, the Meno, I think is very fundamentally important to this dialogue that we're going to talk about today, the Timaeus. So the Timaeus is Plato's, great work on the construction of the universe. The first part that we're looking at today, which goes up to Stephanus reference number 43e, is really about the construction of the intelligent part of the universe. And this is a very significant theme in the Meno, which I was talking about. The Meno ends by presenting to us the idea that all knowledge is recollection. And in fact, further at the end of the Meno, Plato says, knowledge is the account of the reasons why. And we find this account of reasons here in the Timaeus, in the first part of the Timaeus. So I'd like to maybe, make some connections between the Timaeus and the Meno. And I think also very importantly is another dialogue that the group has looked at, which is the Phaedo. And the Phaedo is all about the soul. So the Phaedo is the dialogue where Socrates is talking about death. And of course, Socrates was subjected to death by the tyranny in Athens. And the Phaedo is really the presentation on the soul. And the soul is very prevalent here in this first part of the Timaeus. So maybe we'll have a chance to connect some of the ideas in the Timaeus to both the Meno and the Phaedo. And so I'd like to maybe just start. There's some suggested readings posted. I'd like to start with one particular reading. And so what we'll do is we'll ask Eva to share screen is the first paragraph on the second page there, Eva. Yeah, we'll start by looking at 35A to 35B, and then from here we'll kind of go, pretty much where the group would like to go. And so maybe you can sort of think about what strikes you about particular sections of this this part of the dialogue that we're looking at. But I thought we could start here because there's some themes here that Plato presents, and it's particularly the way that he presents them that we might want to consider, and particularly those last few sentences of this first part of 35A to 35B. So this is further along in the section of the dialogue that we're looking at. But I think maybe an important setting for this is the words at 30B. And so I'll just recount the words in 30B, in which Plato says, and so this is talking about the construction of the universe, in the realm of things naturally visible, no unintelligent thing could as a whole be better than anything which does possess intelligence as a whole. And he further concluded that it is impossible for anything to come to possess intelligence apart from the soul. So here we've got this idea, and I think it's a very fundamentally empowering idea that here's a universe that is constructed in a way that allows intelligence to be paramount. And so this is really something that should be empowering to us as intelligent beings, that the creation of the universe was really focused on the intelligence as being of primary importance. No unintelligent thing could, as a whole, be better than anything which does possess intelligence as a whole. And so, how does a universe get constructed with intelligence being of prime importance? So we have a universe of physics, and we know a great deal about physics and math and the geometry of physics. But how do we fit intelligence into this? And so this section just kind of struck me as being an interesting place to start. And I wonder if one of our participants would like to read this 35A to 35B that we see here on our screens. If anybody would like to read that, and I would say one of the things we do in this meetup, and it's worked fairly well, is we use the raise hands feature. So in your participant screen, if you're interested in speaking to something or sharing in one of the readings such as this, please do use the raise hands feature, and I'll get to you in the order that the hands are raised. But I'll give preference, as it goes on, to those who hadn't spoken before, because we would like as many as possible to participate. So, do I have any volunteers to read this first paragraph, or I can read it if folks would like? Well, why don't I start by reading this section? So this is 35A to 35B, and we're talking here about the construction of the universe. The components from which he made the soul and the way in which he made it were as follows. In between the being that is indivisible and always changeless, and the one that is divisible and comes to be in the corporeal realm, he mixed a third intermediate form of being derived from the other two. Similarly, he made a mixture of the same and then one of the different, in between their indivisible and their corporeal divisible counterparts. And he took the three mixtures and mixed them together to make a uniform mixture, forcing the different, which was hard to mix, into conformity with the same. Now, when he had mixed these two together with being, and from the three had made a single mixture, he redivided the whole mixture into as many parts as his task required, each part remaining a mixture of the same, the different, and of being. This is how he began the division. First, he took one portion away from the whole, and then he took another, twice as large, followed by a third, 1.5 times as large as the second, and 3 times as large as the first. The fourth portion he took was twice as large as the second, the fifth 3 times as large as the third, the sixth 8 times that of the first, and the seventh 27 times that of the first. So I just thought we would start here and maybe look at a few things. We can look at the content of these words, particularly maybe focusing on this distinction between the same and the different. But we can maybe look at the style too that Plato is bringing to us, because I find as we examine Plato's different dialogues, there's very different styles from one dialogue to another. The Symposium was the second dialogue that we looked at, and a very different style, for example, from the Meno, which is the first dialogue that we looked at together. The Meno being very stark, and the Symposium being very lush and rich with background and drama and characters. And here we have an interesting style at the end of this particular section where Plato gets very particular with proportions. He's talking about different measures, and I'm just wondering if this struck anybody as being a little bit unusual. Maybe, what is Plato trying to tell us here? Is this philosophy or is this math? What is it that Plato is trying to tell us here? So I'm just wondering if we have any thoughts to share on this particular section as kind of the starting point for this discussion. Either the words being, or the same and the different, or the particular proportions that Plato's talking about here in the last few sentences. JK, I see your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, that reminds me of, is it he's starting from what Parmenides posited that the universe is is ultimately oneness and whole. And that he's applying the principle of sufficient reason to try to explain how things, what are the causes of all that he believes exists. This wholeness. The sense of wholeness is in the beginning, and it kind of reminds me of a lot of how of course Hegel begins with being also, right? And reminds me also of the Tao Te Ching. It begins with the one and multiplies into the is divided into the many. So it seems like a kind of a regular, pretty much you see this quite a bit, and maybe he was one of the first to assume, make this kind of leap that it all begins with this intelligent oneness. So I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you. And certainly you mentioned the Parmenides, which is, I think it's widely held to be one of Plato's most impenetrable dialogues. In fact, one of our Toronto Philosophy Meetup members is attending a full semester course on the Parmenides itself. And the theme of the Parmenides is definitely the one. And actually, if we look down on the screen a little bit, we won't look at it right now, but the reading in 33b of the Timaeus actually talks about the universe as a whole and as one. And so this idea that the universe itself is one single thing. There is no other. In fact, the Timaeus is in the words that the character Timaeus, who's an astronomer, uses in this dialogue. He's very specific to say that there is only one universe. There is not a multiple of universes. There is only one. And so, yeah, you raise this important point. How do you have this one consistent object, and yet we have this kind of variability of intelligence that's contained within this one object? And I wonder if that's maybe some of the words in this selection 35A to 35B, some of this words having to do with the same and the different. So if we've got this one consistent universe, it contains a number of different things. We have Joel and then Jane. Joel,
Hey, yep, I'm here. My only comment is just a quick question. Is the whole very first paragraph being read, is it implying just simply the ontological argument, so to speak, which is just a branch of metaethics dealing with the nature of being, or showing the relations between the concepts and categories in a subject area or domain?
Well, that's a question that I think maybe we can consider as we continue to talk about the relationship of the word being here to the rest of the theme of the dialogue. And certainly, the question of the same versus the different, it's maybe this option that we have as observers of the universe. So we are the observers. The universe contains physical objects that we observe, and so how is the universe constructed so that it allows us as the observers to observe the physical objects, but it provides us with options and the ability to make choices. And so, yes, I mean, you raise a question, I think that I think we would like to explore. We have Jane.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, this might be a bit random, but this is a bit backtracking to what was said about Hegel. When I was reading this part of the dialogue, I had this association with sort of like the same, the other, and in my book, it was called The Essence, that which joined the same and the other. I had a parallel between what would be like called the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. I'm just wondering if anyone had a similar, I don't know, maybe parallel or similar impression when reading this part of the text.
That's a really interesting point, Jane, because I think as we kind of synthesize knowledge, we need to be able to reflect on what is knowledge and what is not knowledge. And maybe that's a little bit of the ontological question that Joel was asking. And then maybe we need to come somewhere in the middle and determine, where the dividing line is between our knowledge as the observers, the intelligent observers in the universe, and the knowledge of what we're looking at. So thank you for that question. There's lots of good questions here to explore. I have Alex next. Alex?
Hi, James. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is great. Thanks for your presentation and the readings. I guess just want to pick up on a couple of things. Somebody mentioned Parmenides and also just this idea of a kind of synthesis, and I find that really interesting. And what's interesting to me in this passage, in this paragraph, is how there seems to be this, a kind of mixing of these two opposing principles. And I think, and from what I know of Parmenides, also just the actual philosopher, right? He didn't really go in that direction. It was the interest was much more just the one, just the being that doesn't change. And it's interesting that here, I mean, Plato is definitely using that, right? And I think that probably remains the most important for him, right? The unchanging or the eternal. But then he also wants to kind of give reasons or like an account, like you were saying, of, what about those things that are a little bit further down the line, that are not the highest, but still have some maybe being in them. And so we get this idea of a mixture of things that have change in them, but also, also have this oneness somehow connected. And it's very interesting to see how that's going to work out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, and certainly, the word "being" appears throughout this dialogue, and that which is another term that's used, and I'm hoping that we can explore the meaning of those words, "being" and "is" in particular. Being, I think, kind of clearly comes through in this dialogue as referring to universe itself, that which is not begotten, because that's another word that's used sort of in contrast. So something that's begotten is something that is caused by something else, and the universe itself is not caused by something else. It is the cause of all things. And so what comes first and what comes second? Well, the being, that which is not caused by anything else, is universe, and it contains all causes. And I think that's why, that this kind of connection to the Meno, which I was talking about at the beginning, where the Meno talks about knowledge as the account of the reasons why. Well, the reasons why are the causes, and it's up to us as the intelligent beings in this universe to make that account. So how do you construct a universe where you have this account of the reasons why? And how does this intelligence fit into it? And so this first section in 35A and B that we're looking at here now is really, it's kind of this fascinating idea that the creator, I have this picture in my head, the creator has this giant mixing bowl, and he's mixing a little bit of the same, a little bit of the different, and he's allowing intelligence to come along and determine how the same and the different interacts. And he says it's a very hard mixture to make, but we want this. Why do we want the same? Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems that the same is the universe itself will always be the same as a whole. As I think it was J.K. was talking about, the one, there is only one universe, is what the dialogue says. So it is the same to itself. And yet here we are within this universe. We're all parts of the universe, and we all have differences in our perceptions. And so we're mixing the same universe and our differences in perception. So it is actually very interesting to kind of imagine this picture of the craftsman or the demiurge, the creator, forming this universe in this giant mixing bowl of the same and the different. We have Gregory and Alex. 14165. Would you like to speak?
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Oh, there we are. Thank you.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said the being a universe itself, and I'm looking at this same and different being. What type of entity is that? Is like he seems to treat this as somewhat like physical objects here. Like you can divide it and make a mixture. So if this is a metaphor, it's for real, and it goes back to his theory of a form. Form are really indivisible and unchangeable, and now he can divide this form. If this form, that is a type of a reality, and not the becoming. And so I feel that these concepts here are quite not clear. That he didn't really differentiate very clearly these entities, the beings. I would say that same and different are also beings in some way. Mm-hmm. And there's three kind of beings that they treat it as a physical object, mixed here, mixed cut half. And I just wonder that how is Plato taking these in some way that it can be differentiated from the physical objects, or because if we treat physical objects as not reality, then these are reality. They are divisible. I'm just a little bit quite unclear about it, and someone can. I'm hoping someone can comment on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And I think you touch on maybe a distinction that we should discuss and make sure that everyone's clear, kind of in terms of Plato's concept as he's presented. The I think particularly in the Phaedo is something that really struck me, with that difference between the physical and that which is not physical in the universe. And so we've got a visible universe, which is the physical part, and in the Phaedo, Plato uses the word composite for that. So it's composed of parts, and that's the physical universe, the universe that we can see. But the universe also consists of the invisible, which is the soul, and that in the Phaedo, Plato calls the non-composite. So it's not composed of anything. The soul is I think Plato is inviting us to consider that the soul is really the expression of that, eternal being, really an expression of the universe itself. And so that's the invisible part of the universe. So here we're constructing a universe that is invisible, and the invisible part of the universe is the observer that's in each of us, the part that I can't see inside of me. We can look at ourselves in a mirror and see the physical self, but we can't see the invisible part that animates us inside. And so I think Plato calls that the soul. And so we've got this mixture of invisible and visible, the invisible being the non-composite, the thing that is not composed, and the visible physical thing being that which is composed. And so it's interesting, these portions, as you were saying, that Plato talks about here. Is he talking about portions that create the physical universe, or portions that allow for the physical and the non-physical, invisible part of the universe to coincide? So it's an interesting question. Thank you for raising it. We'll see what everybody has to think about it. We'll go to Alex and then JK. Alex?
Thanks, James. Yeah, your last couple of comments, and also the other comment that was made, it was making me think of a contrast. I think a contrast to what Plato is doing here. So many people may have heard of Zeno, the Zeno who gave us the argument of Achilles and the tortoise, and a few others. And Zeno was actually a student of the actual Parmenides, and it was very important for them to prove that change is impossible and change is incoherent, right? And they gave all of these arguments for why, if we take that change is real, we're going to run into all kinds of contradictions. And I think that the Achilles and tortoise argument, where they're kind of, running in a race, was one of those. And I think it's a contrast, because I think Plato, rather than taking that route, is saying, change is not impossible. Change, we can deal with change philosophically. We can accommodate it. Change is not, preferable necessarily. There are higher things than what is changeable, but we can make room for, the changeable within our philosophical picture or framework. And I think that's very exciting. And it's in a way, I think it's an innovation maybe in philosophy as well, and something that will kind of stay in the tradition, right? And later, it will become important also later on.
Thank you, Alex, for that. I mean, very important what you raise in terms of this idea of change, and thank you for bringing Zeno into the conversation. Certainly the paradoxes that Zeno had are things that I think that we can explore throughout our series of dialogues on Plato. Certainly, the one of the things that I saw in this particular reading in 35a to b is the idea of a dynamic universe. And so a dynamic universe is one that accommodates change, and change is important to intelligent beings, because we don't want to all be on some sort of programmed path and incapable of escaping our fate. We want to be masters of our own fate, and apply our intelligence to that purpose. And so here I think we have a universe that's being created that allows for that. And that's why I was kind of using the word empowering before, that it gives us agency in our actions. And so it really is, it's a universe designed for us as intelligent beings to find our way, and to find that kind of beauty of wholeness that's referred to in one of the passages. Again, that idea of oneness, but it connects. It's very clearly connected to beauty in the words in this dialogue. So very important to consider the idea of a universe that accommodates change, but is itself unchangeable, because there is nothing else for it to change into. And I think this is where we look into the words being and is, and are really our understanding of those words is so important. So thank you for raising that, JK.
Yeah, this idea of being as a kind of concept of what is, you can think of it as physical, but if you only think of it as a physical entity, then you couldn't imagine what the soul would be like. So in order for that to become a soul, an invisible soul, you'd have to think of it as completely opposite of being, or different, which what the word difference would mean. And so the opposite of being would be nothing, right? And so nothingness, if you as a concept, could accommodate what is non-physical and invisible, which be like the idea of the soul. And that comes out in other, maybe other philosophies, or thinking of later Hegel, and also the Tao Te Ching. That's how that Tao Te Ching is able to uses the concept of this idea of non-being. Mm-hmm. And so that's, and also Zeno's paradox. Those paradoxes can only make sense, or paradoxes, if you only conflate, or what conflate time and space as that does not account for change, right? And so if you think of it in those terms, in this kind of ultra rational terms, and nothing changes, then it'd be a paradox. But if you but the paradox makes sense, and there's no paradox if you consider the elements of how time and space are actually cannot be conflated or confused with one another. When you say,
Thank you. And I just, you mentioned the nature of time, and one of the themes that we picked out and we may get to in our discussion today is when Plato talks about the nature of time in the Timaeus in 37d to 38c. Very interesting way that he presents time for us to consider, and so we'll hopefully get to that. But as we know from the work of great physicists, for example, Albert Einstein, time and space are intimately connected and not separable. And so definitely something to consider. I just wanted to, I know folks, we didn't actually talk about the chat box in Zoom here at the beginning, but I know people are posting it, and that's great. Normally I'm not able to focus on both the chat box and the discussion, but please do keep using the chat box, and Eva is certainly monitoring it as we go along. I just happened to note a comment that Iman made in the chat box, which really struck me. It was a short one. The soul in its actions is changeable, but in its nature is changeless. So it has a middle status between changelessness and changing. I kind of like that. Expression. So thank you for that. We have again 14165, and then Anne.
Yeah, that's me. I don't know why that my name changed to a number, but I'm going to change it.
I didn't know if you wanted me to use your name, Gregory. So I'm trying to respect what people put on their screen.
I just want to continue the issue of being. That I recently read things about Parmenides, and it seems that the being in Parmenides kind of fragments. My understanding is he meant being be what it is. And so anything that what it is, that is being. So it seems to be pointed from, I think it started from Parmenides, that everything now started pointing into the two directions. One direction is the real world, and another direction is the reality. So what is really, on one hand in the real world is the physical thing. And on the other hand is this metaphysical, this conceptual thing. And the being is really represented two things. One way is the physical, another way is the non-physical. So in such a way that in essence that anything that we're humanly aware can be a being, be physical or non-physical. So that's kind of my understanding of that. But it wasn't really very clear in Parmenides because his writing will be very obscure and very, very few elements. Most of it is really interpretation of the people come after him, including Plato himself. So I think what Plato and future philosophers will really pick up the word of what is, the being, and then elaborate it, expand it, and then modify it, and come to this. When come to Plato, is really being through many generations of philosophers. So the being really is becoming much more convoluted, much more complex, and then loaded with many different interpretations. So that's one. I'd like to make also another comment. It seems reading this, and it seems that Plato is making a model, modeling the universe after the living thing. So and then when the living thing really is the human thing. So I think that it's interesting. The Greeks seem to take a very human-centered approach towards understanding and explanation, including the mythology. Mythologies are gods, and the divine gods are superhumans. Again, come back, human being the base. So here, and then look at the human. They look at in the world all the living thing. They think a human the smartest, the superior with intelligence. Therefore, the universe ought to like a human. So anyway, I found this interesting.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Gregory. Certainly Parmenides is something that we'll need to do a fair bit of preparation for when we get to that one. Certainly to understand the meaning of the words, though, I think is something that you raise is very important. And so there's two words in particular, I think, that you mentioned, the word is and the word living thing, or the phrase, the two words living thing. And so those are words actually we can start exploring, I think, relatively soon, because I was going to move us to 28a to 28b next, really, as kind of the beginning of the train of logic in this whole construction of the universe in the Timaeus. And the word is featured there. I just wanted to mention the word living, or the phrase living thing, is used in this throughout this dialogue, and it's used with a capital L and a capital T in the translation that I'm looking at. And I'm wondering, you mentioned that this is connected to humans as living things, but I'm wondering if Plato is being more inclusive here in talking about all living things, including plants and animals and humans, and encapsulating all of those with that capital L, capital T, living thing, which he refers to as the universe, as the living thing, the capital L and the capital T. And it contains all other forms of living things, all individual forms of living things. And, the word living in there is something that, as I was rereading this last night, struck me as being, what does it mean to be living? Does it mean to have intelligence and consciousness, or does it mean the capacity to regenerate? And if you think about a plant, perhaps a living plant has the capacity to regenerate. And so when you build a universe, you would like it to contain things that are capable of regeneration. And so that's one thought that I had on the question of living thing. So let's explore that as we move forward with this. But we'll have we've got Anne and Jane and Joel next. Anne?
Yeah, I've had my hand up for some time, so I'm sorry, but my question relates to still the prior paragraph. We got kind of derailed onto Parmenides and Zeno, none of which texts we have before us. And we didn't really address that paragraph. I still am, you asked the opening question, which then got derailed. why all that mathematics in the latter part? Why all those divisions and subdivisions? And I'd like to hear some thoughts about that, because I don't understand that, and I think it's one of the more interesting aspects of this.
Well, thank you, Anne. And certainly my own approach to Plato is from my love of geometry, and so I spent a long time, as I said, in self-study of physics, and in the course of doing that, I got interested in geometry. And so Plato, it should be remembered, is known primarily, I think, now as a philosopher, but back then he was a geometer. And in fact, above the door to his academy were the words, "Let no one who is bereft of geometry enter these doors." And so um, personally, and I don't know what everybody else thinks, but we can discuss this. But personally, that's why I raised the question at the beginning. I think there is some geometry involved in the last few sentences of this section, and maybe there is some knowledge there that we can obtain from those words. But we'll hear from what everybody else thinks. So thank you for raising that point. And we don't have to stick to any particular agenda with this discussion. I think that's the beauty of having our own discussion, is that we can go wherever the group wants. So I was just starting. I wanted to initiate the discussion with this particular reading, but we can go anywhere we like. So thank you, Anne, for that. We'll go to Jane and then Joel. Jane?
On the question of mathematics, I was actually thinking a lot about that too. To be honest, I can't say that I've made this logic connection, and I understand completely what Plato was trying to say, or at least have more or less of a correct idea. My only sort of guess was that, and this will also, I guess, kind of fit into what was said before about the being and becoming. How I see it is that when Plato was in the dialogue, when he was writing about being, that being which is, so being is, and is eternal. So it's actually non-material to my understanding. And what we see on the other side of the eternal is the changing. So the opposite, sort of the other, is the changing. And the changing is what is becoming, but it never is. So the changing, the becoming, that which never is what we understand by the use of our senses and opinions and beliefs. But the internal, the being, that which always is, but is actually non-material, we comprehend it by way of reason and intelligence and truth. And the way that I guess, saw the whole mathematics situation was that Plato was trying to infuse reason, intelligence, and truth into what is changing, becoming, which is based on sense and opinion and belief, by introducing mathematics. And by way of this sort of subject, which is supposed to be based on truth and on reason and intelligence, he tries to infuse the material, that which is becoming, which never is, which we understand using our senses and opinions. And I hope this makes sense, because I know I'm saying a lot of things right now. So using mathematics as that way of intelligence and the eternal to add to what is opinion and sense and changing but never is. And I also, when I was thinking about this situation of, I was very fascinated by the division of the same, the other, and the essence being that which joins the same and the other. I was thinking about whether sort of intelligence, soul, and body is also a form of the same, the other, and the essence, the changing, where the intelligence is the same, the eternal, the soul is a sort of essence which joins the intelligence to the body, and the body is the changing. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Jane, that's good. I mean, you really touched on so many important points, and what you said, I think, is such a really good lead in to 28A, 28B, which is the second reading that I thought we could look at, because that's really I think the start of the logical train that leads to that paragraph that we started at with 35AB. If we look at 28AB, I think that really touches on a lot of what you just spoke about. certainly Plato in here in the Timaeus, he uses the term a moving image of eternity. The universe is a moving, or what we see as a moving image of eternity. And the word "is," I think, is something that you really caused us to think about with your words, Jane. And I just wanted to throw this out to everyone listening. When you look out, or when you look at the screen, for example, as you're looking at me talk, are you seeing me exactly at the same moment that I'm talking? I would submit there's an important piece of information actually that I learned a few years ago when I watched the series The Brain by neuroscientist David Eagleman, that our brains each take 1/10 of a second to process meaning. And so when I'm looking at the screen, I'm not seeing everybody as you are at that particular instant. I'm processing that 1/10 of a second later. So I'm looking at Greg, for example, on the screen now. I'm not seeing you, Greg, as you exist at that very particular instant. I'm perceiving you 1/10 of a second later. And we all work with that same delay in perception. And it's just, because the brain needs a little bit of time to process. And so that really raises, using modern science, neuroscience, that really raises the question of what is. Is the word "is" something that exists at any particular moment? Or I think Plato, as elsewhere, referred to the present as a state of coming to be. It's not a state that is, it's a state of coming to be. And I think that maybe gets us into understanding that train of logic that starts at 28a to 28b. So anyway, I just wanted to interject that, and we can explore that in terms of the meaning of the word "is." And so thank you again, Jane, for raising that. I'll go to Joel and then Akosh. Joel?
Hi, yes, please. So I'm just really quickly looking for a clarification on the word "being" that's being used. When we refer to the word "being," are we simultaneously using that to describe both a person that is aware as well as the universe itself? Is there, say, like a distinction between the two words knowledge and information? So, like, for example, when I use the word knowledge or intelligence, I'm thinking of, a person being aware of their surroundings and using the information around them. Whereas maybe is information just just a definition of like just data, or just is information being referred to as the same word as being? Like, is it in it's self-aware? Because then I'm trying to find the differences between the contemporary definition of a brute fact, which is like a fact that just has no further explanation in of itself, or are we using like the principle of sufficient reason, where we're going with the method that everything eventually will have an explanation further on? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. It's and certainly you raised an important point, I think, about maybe the distinction between information and knowledge. I would think, thinking about how Plato continuously throughout various dialogues refers to knowledge as recollection, and in the end of the Meno, he refers to knowledge as the account of the reasons why. To me, that's indicating that knowledge is maybe something that has meaning, whereas information, just raw information or raw data, has no particular meaning, right? So it's this intelligent part of the living thing, the capital L living thing, which is the universe, maybe this eternal being, the universe, that because there is no other, it is the only thing that is eternally being. Maybe it's this idea that this knowledge or meaning is transmitted using information or data. It's a fascinating concept, particularly as the world is now getting into the realm of quantum computing, where there is this basic, it seems like a basic kind of informational structure to the universe in which knowledge or information can be transmitted. But the question is, how do we construct a universe where knowledge can be formed and transmitted, and where is the the kind of functional space for that knowledge in the universe. So it's you raise a number of interesting points there. Thank you. And certainly anybody can feel free to answer those points and any others as we continue our discussion. So we'll move to Akash and then Greg. Akash?
Hey everyone. First of all, it's nice to be back. It was also nice to hear Alex's voice after a year or something. So I just wanted to interject something with the living thing. Like, why is there the capital L living thing? Why is there the small living? And I'm particularly trash at the Greek, like old philosophy, but as far as I understand, like the capital living thing is the real true stuff, and it's like what Plato sometimes calls also the true astronomy or the real astronomy of the real world. I think that the craftsman is the creature that renders the living thing into our actual universe. And then so there's this living thing, and then this living thing is projected into like a three-dimensional tangible space that is receptible of all becoming. So that's like receptible to us, or like this particular material reality. So I think that the big living thing is the true everything, and then it's projected by the craftsman to this geometry, to whatever. So that I just wanted to interject with this, like what this big living thing means.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And certainly, again, the term "a moving image of eternity" kind of implies maybe some sort of a projection, and we can certainly explore that. It's certainly a significant point that I think will come up in the next few readings. Greg?
Yeah, I just want to kind of continue the discussion Akash was raising regarding information and knowledge. Information really is a modern notion, and at Plato's time, it wasn't really so clear. Plato was and his people was trying to really understand or define what knowledge is, and that's permeating in his many dialogues. And according to what his thinking is, other than the being, the essence of the reality, everything that the becoming, the visible world isn't really not real. Therefore, you cannot pin down. And so all these facts of factual knowledge are not really knowledge. So his notion of knowledge is very narrow. In later time, Aristotle seems to expand, say, well, there's two kinds of knowledge. There's scientific knowledge, and then there's factual knowledge. So the scientific knowledge really was what Plato is after. And Aristotle say, let's continue this and take this, whatever, the knowledge about the reality is a scientific knowledge. The visible world is factual knowledge. And this factual knowledge later on come to today's world, all information will in essence also be a knowledge, but it's a factual knowledge according to Aristotle. So I just want to I recently read about this and think about this, and I thought, that's what I get in terms of the historical development.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And certainly, I guess knowledge maybe could also encompass the imagination. And the imagination, to me, really seems to range from fact to fiction. And so somewhere in there, we need to accommodate the ability to kind of change our circumstances, and something definitely worth thinking about. And this I think is a really good point for us to jump into that reading. Eva, if you would do the screen share again, the 28A to 28B reading here. That's the middle paragraph there, and yeah, just the middle paragraph on that page. And I'm wondering if somebody might like to read that, because it touches on what you said, Greg, but it touches really, I think, quite well on what Jane presented a few minutes ago when she spoke. Would we have a volunteer who would read this short paragraph here, 28A to 28B?
I'll jump in.
Okay, thank you.
As I see it, then, we must begin by making the following distinction. What is that which always is and has no becoming? And what is that which becomes but never is? The former is grasped by understanding, which involves a reasoned account. It is unchanging. The latter is grasped by opinion, which involves unreasoning sense perception. It comes to be and passes away, but never really is. Now everything that comes to be must of necessity comes to be by agency of some cause, for it is impossible for anything to come to be without a cause. So whenever the craftsman looks at what is always changeless and, using a thing of that kind as his model, reproduces its form and the character, then of necessity, and all that he is completes is beautiful. But were he to look at a thing that has come to be and use as his model something that has been begotten, his work will lack beauty.
Well, thank you. And here, I think, is really where the train of logic begins that leads us to the conclusion at 35a to b. And so in this first step of the logic in 28a to b, Plato is saying, first we have to distinguish between that which always is and has no becoming. And I think he's saying that that's the universe, or the character Timaeus is saying that that is the universe. The universe is that which is and has no becoming. And distinguish between that and that which is begotten, so that which becomes but never is. And so they say here that it's that which is begotten has a cause, right? So the universe itself has no cause, but everything that the universe consists of is caused, and so that's the begotten part. And this is the part that Jane really highlighted when she spoke is that that which always is, which is the former here, that which always is grasped by understanding, which involves a reasoned account. And so my mind, as I was reading that, went immediately back to the end of the Meno, which in which Socrates says that knowledge is the account of the reasons why. We have a reasoned account, and the reasoned account is what we apply to understand that which always is. All right. But the latter, which is that which is begotten, in other words, the things that come and go, the changing things, is grasped by opinion, which involves unreasoning sense perception. So we have, the five senses, and we apply those five senses to understand the changing things in the universe. But those senses can't understand the universe itself. So I thought this was particularly kind of a very interesting and clear beginning of the logical process, where Plato's drawing this distinction between the eternal is and the changing becoming phases. And so I was just wondering what people think about that as the beginning of this logical train, and then we'll go on to maybe look at a few other sections of this logical process. So Akash, your hand is up. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, sorry. So I have a misunderstanding, I think. So you were saying that the universe always was. From the text, what I understood that's not the case. From what I understood from the text is that the living thing always was. The craftsman always was. The universe is a thing, therefore it has become. Things that become are caused. The cause of the universe is the craftsman, and the model of the universe is the living thing that always been, so it has not become. This is my understanding.
Okay. No, and I mean, yes, thank you for raising that distinction. And so maybe when I say the universe always is, I shouldn't use the term universe specifically like that, because it certainly consists of physical elements which haven't always been. But maybe it's the model that always is. I don't know what others think about that. We have JK and then Alex and then Jane. JK?
Yeah, I think, Plato's view that being, is this rational being, is kind of an assumption that that rational being is the true one, the true rational being. So it brings into question, there's this idea that these forms are rational and they're out beyond our perception, but somehow our rational or reason can understand what that is the kind of question, whether that that is the ultimate cause of what our empirical or our existence in the empirical world, and so those kind of this kind of point, of course, comes later with with other more modern philosophers like Schopenhauer. The idea that are we caused by this being that we posit with our so-called reason, or do we have to rely on, or can you get a more more realistic understanding of what the cause is by looking around ourselves, and in the entities in the outside world, in nature itself. And so he's raising, he's prioritizing, that we're prioritizing this rational being that he's positing here.
Well, thank you. And the word rational, I think, maybe relates in this particular paragraph that we're looking at here to the word reasoned. So when we talk about making a reasoned account, maybe that's a rational process where we're starting maybe not at the beginning, because there is no beginning to that which always is. So we start with what we have now and we make a reasoned account backwards. So here's what we have now. How did it get this way? What caused those things that caused our current situation? And we just continuously go back to make our reasoned account. And so maybe that's kind of the process that's being talked about here. And I guess to me that maybe that's just one of those cases of Plato's logic that really just strikes me as being very compelling. If something always is, you can never go back to the beginning. You can never find the beginning point because there is no beginning point. So you can go back though and make your reasoned account. And so I think that's the kind of compelling thing here that he talks about. So thank you very much for that point. We've got Alex and then Jane. Alex?
Yeah, just on the question of if the world, the universe is eternal, I think that's fair to say for the Greeks, because there is definitely this eternal realm of the forms, and pure souls would be there as well. I think James, you were emphasizing that, and there's another point, which this I think becomes important later on when Christianity comes about, because the Greeks and I think Plato here, they take that there is this eternal matter, or this stuff, kind of undifferentiated stuff, that the demiurge just kind of takes up and shapes into forms, right? And the matter itself is in a sense uncreated. Only we can never really know it outside of forms, right? But it's kind of always been there. That's the sense that I have, and of course, when Christianity comes about, that will be very problematic, right? Because God needs to create the world out of nothing, and so I think that's one of those parts of Greek thought that gets rejected, right? But here, I think the picture I have is there are eternal forms. There is this matter, which is kind of almost mysterious what it is. It can't really be understood. And then the mixtures of them, those are created, and those are probably not eternal. They get created and destroyed, and that's maybe what happens when a person dies.
Thank you. That's I actually just wanted to go back, and it touches on what you said, Alex, and I think what Akos asked earlier, and it's in 29E, and it just kind of talks about the frame or the creator or the demiurge who created, um, who formed this structure, and he says, now why did he who framed this whole universe of becoming frame it? Let us state the reason why. He was good, and one who is good can never become jealous of anything. And so, being free of jealousy, he wanted everything to become as much like himself as was possible. And so, that particular part just kind of maybe addresses the motivation for all of this creation. And this mixing of the same and the different to create this dynamic universe that allows for beings such as us to have intelligence and to form meaning and to change things as we desire and to kind of shape our own existence. But this interesting word jealousy in that particular section, and when I thought about it, jealousy can be like a negative emotion. But here I think all that's being said is that there was nothing to be jealous of. To be jealous is to want something that somebody else has. Well, in this case, there is nothing else. There is only the creator. And so there is no jealousy. And so there was nothing else to base an image of being, the universe, or all of existence on other than the creator itself. So it was an interesting kind of point that I just wanted to raise there. That was in 29E, those particular words. So we might want to consider that. I have Jane next. Jane?
I wanted to add a little bit about the being and whether it could be the universe, perceived as the universe. To my mind, and this is based on what I've read in this dialogue, and a bit on the logic that I understood in some previous dialogues that we went through. So to me, the being, I understood it, the being as the eternal, and the eternal is something intangible. Because if something is tangible and perceivable by the senses, therefore it is not eternal, it is not being, it is changing and becoming. And I guess the only way that I would be able to say that the being or that the eternal is a matter, if I was to think of the matter as something metaphysical and like not turn it into something material. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to add, because it's probably going to get messy from this point. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And certainly I think you're echoing what is said in the third or fourth sentence of 28A to be that reading that we just did, and where the character Timaeus says the latter, which is that which comes to be but never is grasped by opinion, which involves unreasoning sense perception. So we are endowed with 5 senses, and we can perceive the physical world around us. But what those senses cannot perceive is the metaphysical. And I use that word in the meetup notice for this, but really not in any sort of particular interpretation other than just that which is not physical, that which is beyond physical. So we've got this metaphysical concept, and I think that's what Socrates continues to refer to through all of the dialogues as the soul, that which is invisible, or again, as I said earlier, with respect to the Phaedo, the non-composite, that which is not composed of anything. We've got a physical component of the universe, which is composed of things, equal and opposite measures of action and reaction, atoms consisting of electrons, protons, and neutrons. All of that is what the physical world is composed of. And we've got our senses, which senses don't have reason. The brain has reason. But the senses are unreasoning perception. And so that, as you said, Jane, is what we use to examine the physical universe. But how do we form meaning of that? And that whole realm of meaning is I think, if I'm understanding the way you use the word, which is the same way I would understand it, metaphysical. So thank you for that. And let's explore that concept. JK and then Greg. JK?
Yeah, I guess that raises the question of, which has the true knowledge of being? Is it the rational understanding of being, or is it the, empirical sense understanding of being? So it's possible to say that the being that can be spoken is not the real being. Mm-hmm. Or as they say, maybe Socrates might say, he who speaks does not know, and he who knows does not speak. Which raises so it's maybe it's the neither becoming or one's rational concept of being, but it's somewhere in between or neither or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thank you. And certainly as our capacity to understand more and more of how the universe works. I mentioned earlier that we're about to enter the age of quantum computing, and there's this whole quantum realm of the universe that really is not fully understood. The fact that one of the famous quantum experiments is the split beam experiment, where you have a light, shine it through two slits, and the very act of observation of the light coming through the two slits actually changes the scattering pattern of the light. And so that's the famous double slit experiment in quantum mechanics, that we don't really know how that functions. And so there are things that, we can look out, I can look out the window and I can see objects like buildings and people and cars, and I can have a sense of understanding of what those are. But there is this whole other realm that really is left to this kind of metaphysical process of forming meaning of it. And so I think that's the interesting part that science is kind of bringing us to now, is that maybe necessity of understanding what lies beyond the five senses. And I think this particular section of reading 28A to 28B is particularly important in understanding that distinction between that which always is and the becoming, and the fact that the becoming is what we access with the senses, but that which always is where we have to make that reason to count. And to me, it's a very powerful section of that beginning process of the logic that leads to the rest of the part of the dialogue that deals with the construction of the universe. We have Greg. Greg?
I'd just like to, ask maybe a question or for inviting some clarification from other people regarding this being as an eternity thing. The way that Plato described his creation of the universe and the soul, indicating that universe and the soul has a beginning. And and it's a becoming. So if because before that it doesn't exist, God created. So it's created, therefore there's a becoming and there's a beginning, and so are the gods and the source. And to me, that the only thing that he thinks that the God thing exists is this same and different these conceptual beings that was there already, or the matter itself, and everything else is becoming. So in relation to the soul being eternal in his other dialogues, and I find that it's not consistent. So anybody like to comment on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for raising that. And I would just again recall those words in 29E. Now, why did he who framed this whole universe of becoming frame it? So first, Plato has made the distinction between that which always is And then he says, distinguish that from that which is becoming. And so in 29e, he says, now why did he who framed this whole universe of becoming? So the creator hasn't framed that which is, because the creator is part of that which is. The creator has framed the universe of becoming, which is that part of the universe that becomes and goes. So that part of the universe that is begotten. That's the way I'm reading those words in 29e. So that which is always is, and the creator didn't create that which is, because the creator is. And it's just this part of the universe that's continually becoming, that's being created by the creator. And so it's an interesting distinction, and I think that's why the logic starting at 28ab makes that first distinction. You have to first distinguish between that which always is and that which is becoming. So I don't know if that's helpful. And does anybody else have any thoughts on that? So Eva's put that up on the screen again. That first sentence of 28ab. As I see it, then we must begin by making the following distinction: what is that which always is and has no becoming, and that which is that which becomes but never is. So making that distinction, I think, is important with the words that I just read from 29e. So the creator created the universe of becoming, but not the part that always is. JK.
So you're saying that the creator is the creation that we are already in and becoming, right? So I think the idea of nature itself being the creator, right? Being the ultimate creator that constantly creates who we are, and we are in nature itself. We are the universe. We are part of the universe, and that is the creation and the creator, right? Is that what you're saying? It's like like Spinoza's idea of the ultimate substance is nature, and nature is God, and the creator. So that's a very compelling idea that bring forth here.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean that's the way I'm reading it. Actually, they just this beginning of the logical process in 28ab, making that very first distinction, I think is so critical to understanding all that flows from it. And JK, you mentioned Spinoza, another kind of geometric philosopher. But I think maybe it's in some other kind of religious and cultural traditions too, to think that we are intrinsically part of nature, that eternal being is inside of us, always, and always has been and always will be. I think that's a powerful idea, and I think a very empowering idea as well. So and certainly, let's certainly explore that. It's I don't know if others are seeing this distinction in 28ab, that we need to start with really kind of separating in our minds that which always is, which is the eternal, unchanging existence of being, that which has never been begotten. It has no cause. The creator, there is no cause to the creator, and there is no cause to eternal being. But what is caused is the becoming, that continuous process of becoming. Jane.
James, I actually saw it, I guess, in a very similar way. And I think that I saw in a person, in a human being. So the eternal is the intelligence, the changing or the becoming is the body of the person, and the soul, and I think this was mentioned by someone in the chat, the soul is sort of like the in-between element. It is eternal and it is changing, and it ties together the intelligence and the body. That was my perception, at least, interpretation of what I read.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And certainly this idea of tying together is something that maybe towards the end, and actually I see we're not too far off from the end. We've got another 35 minutes or so. But there was a part at in 31C in particular where Plato talks about combinations of two things requiring a third element, which is the bond that unites them. And so, Jane, I think you may have touched on a very important point here, that this bond that ties two things together. And is that bond the soul? The kind of, and maybe when I think of that bond, and as you spoke earlier too, of the intelligence, the soul, and the body, is the bond really that thing? If it's the soul, it kind of brings meaning to us, that makes sense of all of this. So you raised a powerful point, Jane, and I'm wondering what others think about that. We've got Akash and then Joel. Akash?
So I was just writing in the chat about this bonding. So as far as I understand, this is like I don't know, this is like one of the most, like, I think one of the coolest parts of this piece from Plato, because I think he did. So this bonding together is like part of the argument of deriving the four elements from first principles, as opposed to like some sort of observation or whatever, or using them as a priori and then building the world from them. So I think this is the part, like on the chat, this golden ratio has been going on the whole time. And I think this is like, so he derives so he starts with like two things, because you need fire to observe the universe. And then this other thing, which I don't know what is the other basic, like air. And then he starts saying that like you need this third element, and that's because of the golden ratio. We always need a third to tie things together because of this golden ratio. And then this is like, I think, the genius part of it, that like it derives that we need more elements if we have two, based on geometric principles. So not because of the way this world is or anything, but it is from the living thing, this geometric principle, that you need the third stuff. And so I think he gives the example of like 2, 4, 8. And so to make 2 related to 8, you need something in the middle. And then so because like 2 over 4 is equals to 4 over 8 and backwards. And I think this is like and I don't remember how we get to the point that we also get the fourth thing. I will look it up.
Thank you. And yeah, I haven't been able to follow the chat box as much as I would hope, just as I'm focusing on people's spoken discussion here. But for our listeners, the golden ratio is a key mathematical and geometric ratio that relates the smaller and the larger parts to a whole. And certainly, here where Plato is talking about the universe as a whole that consists of multiple parts, or comprises multiple parts, that golden ratio kind of relationship where it doesn't matter whether something is small or large, but everything relates eventually, I think is very, very important mathematical and geometric concept that would apply when you're creating this whole, but then you're allowing the whole to divide into many different parts. So I'll be interested to see the chat record later on after the discussion is finished. So thank you. And Joel?
Yes, please. So I'm looking for a clarification that was said at the beginning of the meeting. Just to verify, what are we saying, that the idea of eternity and being are one and the same thing, but the universe itself, whether it's material or immaterial, does not have a beginning? Or did we say earlier that the universe is eternal, or like how does that square up between, like, say, if all of matter had a beginning, how does that tie in with Plato's forms, when there's like at least a characteristic of, like, from the cave and coming out of the cave until like a perfect version of that form? So if there's a perfect version of the forms, then there's at least an idea of matter that is eternal and essentially never had a beginning. So are we saying that the universe had a beginning or didn't?
Thank you, and I think it's a good question to be clear on if clarity is in fact possible, and we'll see what people have to say. But I go back to that first distinction that's made in 28ab, which is that which always is, and that perhaps relates to Plato's forms. That eternal always is. Maybe the forms are some sort of expression of that always is, and then the forms maybe help us to get into this physical world of becoming, right? So there's that distinction, that there is that which always is, and then there is the universe of becoming. So when we say universe, perhaps we're thinking about that which becomes, because that's kind of our daily experience. So our daily experience is with what the five senses bring us. And the five senses bring us is knowledge of that which is becoming. The five senses cannot bring us knowledge of that which always is. And I think that's what Plato is saying in the very first sentence of 28a, is that you cannot have knowledge of that which always is. You can only make a reasoned account. You cannot not have absolute knowledge of that which always is. So I just wanted to, maybe we can consider that in terms of when we say the word universe, what exactly do we mean? Do we mean both that which always is, which is unchanging perhaps, and do we mean that which is becoming, which is the always changing physical part of the universe? And how do the forms tie into that? I think that would be very important to explore. So thank you for that, Joel. I've got Jane, and then I've got the other Joel. Jane?
I'm sorry for making so many remarks today. I promise this is going to be the last one. This is sort of how I interpreted or perceived the whole situation that Joel was addressing. So basically, the way that I saw it is the ideas is the eternal, and that they are non-material because they are intangible, and basically that the changing, the becoming, so basically the universe, because I understood the universe as being something more or less perceptible and tangible in a way. So it is something that it is changing, that it is becoming, but it never is. And the way that I understood it in a very schematic format is that the eternal, the world of ideas, I guess it could be called, is sort of the original, and the universe, that which is material, which is becoming but never is sort of like an imitation. It's a very good, a very concise imitation, but there is the original, which is non-material, which is eternal, which is being, always is, and it is based on pure reason, intelligence, and truth. That was how I imagined this whole situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And you used a very important word there, I think, which is imitation. And maybe, Eva, we just, in the time that remains, we can just take a quick detour. If you want to put on the screen reading number 3, when you get a chance. And as we take the other comments here, maybe we can just look at this reading on the screen, and then we'll have a volunteer maybe to read it out. Because I don't want to forget the other two parts of this, some of the other major themes that Plato starts with, which is, so it was reading 3, Eva, on I think it's on the next page, the following page after that. So if you go another page down, Eva, so we can just consider this next page that's coming up here, because Plato starts with talking about or having Socrates. Actually, the previous page of it, yeah. Socrates starts by talking about what he had been discussing the previous night, which was the politics. And I think it's pretty clear here that it's a reference to what he's talking about in the Republic. So in reading number 3, this is how the Timaeus starts. And it's kind of a curious thing, but I just wanted to get back to this because you use the word imitation. And the word imitators is right here at the end of this particular selection. So while we go on to consider this, I just wanted to pick up on that theme, because it's kind of interesting why why did Plato start this dialogue with kind of a recounting of some of these themes that he visited in the Republic? And we actually talked about this 2 weeks ago in our session on the Alcibiades, when we got into a discussion of kind of this, was Plato a totalitarian? Did he believe that society should be created in the way that was specified by, I think it was Adamantus in the Republic, kind of continually set out this kind of society where children would be taken away from their parents, raised without knowing who their parents are, a society that is guarded by people that's kind of really incapable of guarding itself, so it needs to have these guardian class taking care of it. And what I picked up on was the word imitator, which is what you just mentioned, Jane. So I didn't mean to, there was, I think I preempted a few questions in my long monologue there, but I don't know if anybody else wanted to interject before we just take a quick read of this section, because I wanted to maybe just incorporate this before we close out our discussion today, is just kind of understanding why Plato would include this in a dialogue about the creation of the universe. Is he trying to say something with respect to this kind of image that we create and our ability to manage our own image, use the imagination to manage our own societies? So I don't know if, I think I did see a few hands up before I got to this. So I don't know if anybody would like to interject, or whether we could maybe have a volunteer to read this section if we'd like to go here, because it does tie into, I think, with what we've been talking about, this moving image of eternity and our place of in this moving image of eternity. Would we have a volunteer who'd like to read this section? Well, why don't I read this section then? So this is right near the beginning of the Timaeus. So this is Socrates speaking. All right, I'd like to go on now and tell you why I've come to feel about the political structure we've described. My feelings are like those of a man who gazes upon magnificent-looking animals, whether they're animals in a painting or even actually alive but standing still, and then who finds himself longing to look at them in motion or engaged in some struggle or conflict that seems to show off their distinctive physical qualities. I felt the same thing about the city we've described. I'd love to listen to someone give a speech depicting our city in a contest with other cities, competing for those prizes that cities typically compete for. I'd love to see our city distinguish itself in a way that it goes to war, or in the way it pursues the war, that it deals with other cities one after the other in ways that reflect positively on its own education and training, both in word and deed. That is, both in how it behaves towards them and how it negotiates with them. Now, in these matters, Critias and Hermocrates, I charge myself with being quite unable to sing fitting praise to our city and its men. That this should be so in my case isn't at all surprising, but I have come to have the same opinion of the poets, our ancient poets as well as today's. I have no disrespect for poets in general, but everyone knows that imitators are as a breed, are best and most adept at imitating the sort of things they've been trained to imitate. And I just, I think this is maybe pretty fundamental to the message that Plato is trying to bring to us in this creation of a universe that allows for intelligence, the primacy of intelligent beings. And is he saying here that intelligent beings shouldn't try to just imitate what's gone before? Like, is he saying something about how we should use our intelligence? He uses the words in here that in ways that reflect positively on its own education and training. And so this kind of development and transmission of knowledge, and how we train each other with that knowledge. And so when we use that knowledge in this world of becoming that the creator has formed, when we use this knowledge, do we use it to imitate, or do we use it to continually create something that's always changing, and something hopefully that's always better and always more beautiful? Beauty is another term that was used in the Timaeus, and it's used in other dialogues as well. And I found in the Timaeus it was used in particular in the sense of the whole. There was the I'm just looking for the section. I think it was in 33b where Plato talked about the beauty of the whole. I'm just wondering what other people think. Do people see this connection between why Plato starts the dialogue with this little recounting of the themes that are presented in the Republic, and then he goes on to talk about the creation of the universe? Was this just kind of thrown in for, just dramatic interest, or does it actually have some connection with the whole idea of the creation of a universe that allows for intelligence? A dynamic universe that allows for intelligence. Just wondering what people think about that. Any thoughts? And then does that tie into the legend of Atlantis, which then follows that discussion of the Republic? Alex?
Yeah, what's interesting about this passage is it seems like he is, in a sense, honoring becoming in a certain way. He's not saying changes or seeing the animal involved in battle, let's say, or seeing the city's army involved in battle. That this is something that should be kind of honored, and um, it should, poets should sing its praise. Although the poets, it seems, are not the right people for that. So it's interesting that there's some truth in a way, or something beautiful to be found in the way things move, in the way they kind of display their properties in that kind of motion. And it does make me wonder, so who can do this then? If it's not the poets, maybe is this the philosopher's task? And I think the question you're raising is really important about exactly how. So is it imitation that that can do this job? And it doesn't seem like imitation is the right activity. And then what is the right activity? So for me, it raises a lot of questions. I'm not really sure what to say, but maybe this different. I think you were alluding to this, possibly, James. This difference between the poet and the philosopher, which we see, of course, in other dialogues. The Republic, there are long sections on that. So maybe that's an important distinction here.
Well, Alex, I mean, thank you so much. I mean, you had that lovely phrase, honoring becoming. I really picked up on that, and I think that's really important, and it ties into all of the discussion I think that we've had to this point, this idea of becoming versus being, as kind of two different states. Being is always there. Becoming is something that continuously happens, but being is always there. And I really like the way you put it, that this is kind of this idea of honoring becoming. Do we continually strive to become, and continually strive to become better and more beautiful, or do we imitate that which has come before? And I just wanted to kind of relate that again to the legend of Atlantis, which is fairly short in this part of the dialogue, that because that follows this, where Plato is recounting this ancient, civilization that, Socrates says, yes, it absolutely existed. Socrates says that in here. It's a relatively short account in here, but he's talking, and Eva's just putting up on the screen. I don't think we'll have time to read this particular section, but we can look at it on the screen. He's talking about this civilization that enslaved people and so on. Who's actually was a predecessor of Plato's, and the great lawgiver of Athens, had this discussion and found out about this ancient civilization. Now, Plato talks about this, and reminds us that there are these civilization-destroying events caused by fires and floods. There's actually an allusion in here that could be read as a reference to the asteroid strike that happened that wiped out the dinosaurs. He talks about a fire that obliterated the entire planet. And so memory is lost over time. And so we maybe think that we can reach out and imitate these ancient societies like Atlantis, which was this society that had incredible technological power. But in doing so, are we honoring our ability to become? And I really like that way that you put that, Alex. Do we continually honor our ability to become, or do we try to imitate great things that have happened before, but our memory is very vague because of these events that destroy memories? So an important idea. JK and then Anne. JK.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about the last one. Where he compares, perhaps he's comparing humans, human culture at that time, the poets, to animals who were driven by instinct to, do the same thing over and over, and not be able to, become better. And maybe that's where, he concludes that, reason, the philosopher, is the one, relying on reason to overcome the instincts, overcome what is, how one is naturally driven by nature or by culture, to just imitate the same kind of activities without, becoming better or going beyond what is, what just becomes over and over.
Thank you. And certainly that ability to reason, I think, is maybe one of the things that Alex was pointing out too when he asked, who can do this? This honoring of becoming. Maybe here is Plato is saying that the poets don't necessarily appeal to reason. Maybe they appeal more to emotion, with the beauty of their words. And so maybe it's reason, which is philosophers, but maybe it's anybody who really develops knowledge and understands that knowledge is both recollection and the account of the reasons why, as again Plato says at the end of the Meno, and then throughout a number of other dialogues. So this ability to reason, I think, is something that you pointed out is very important. I have Anne. Anne?
Yeah, first, as we winding up, thanks so much, James, to you and Ava for pulling this all together and curating it. It's nicely done. Also, I wanted to kind of do pushback on the idea that paragraph, the prior one, prior to the Atlantis, has to do with honoring becoming. I read it completely differently. I think Socrates, the way it hit me at least, is that Socrates is slyly questioning, whatever it is they discuss that they're all referring to, they discussed the day before, is this human construct. Here's what the military is going to do. Here's what the forest people are going to do. Here's what everybody's going to do, and it's going to be fine. But he's basically saying, but I'd kind of like to see that in action, not just in this set, picture, this static picture. But I'd like to see that. And I don't think he's saying because I want to honor the concept of becoming. That sounds way too modern to me, frankly. I think what he's doing is rolling into question, saying, look, when you put this into play, this picture, just like you take animals out of a picture and start to let them really interact in nature, things aren't going to be what you expect. And so I think this is more cautionary than, this sort of more, like I said, it sounds very modern to me, this take on, let's honor becoming. I think there's a great deal of, what shall I say, caution about the becoming aspect of it as compared to the being aspect of it. A certain call for, look, you may be being a little overweening in this. It's almost like a caution to a certain humility that once you put that static scenario into actual play, more than likely, it's not going to play out like some machine that you've created, since you're not the creator anyway. So, yeah, I don't think the honor of honoring becoming is, very, smooth, but I don't think it's applicable here at all. That's not the way I read this at all, but just my thoughts.
Oh, thank you, Anne. And I think actually we're probably reading it the same way. And I'm thinking that Alex, maybe when he said honoring becoming, it was more in the sense of a bit of a cautionary advice as well. And that's the way I read it too. That as you said, um, in saying this, Socrates is saying that really what they talked about the night before, and I think a lot of what's reflected in that kind of what seems to be a totalitarian structure in the Republic is we need to be cautious about that, because as you said, if you actually put that into motion, it's almost like they created a two-dimensional construct. But if you were to put it into motion in 3 dimensions and then add time to it, then it wouldn't work. And I think that is what Socrates is saying here. And um, I think that that's kind of consistent in a way with what Alex was saying, is that instead of imitating, and when Alex said honoring becoming, it's that's different from imitation. And so imitation is, I think, the point was that that's where you're not honoring becoming. You're just trying to imitate something that has become before, but you're not trying to exercise your power or your agency in becoming, which is that that cause that we need to continually move ourselves forward with. So here we've got this wonderful image of Socrates saying, gee, we created this two-dimensional structure the day before when we were talking about politics, but if you put it into motion, as you said, Anne, would it really work? And I think that's, time has told us, no, that's not something that would really work, because what does it do for the soul? What does it do for the spirit? How does it motivate us to continually become better than what we have been? How does it motivate us away from this imitation? And I found that very powerful. As I thought about the reason why Plato started this dialogue with that discussion, with those references to the Republic, and then that reference to Atlantis, I think, as you said, Anne, I think it's really a bit of a cautionary tale. And then he goes on to talk about the construction of a universe that allows for this bonding of the soul, to the physical and to the metaphysical and to knowledge. As I think Jane said very powerfully earlier, this ability of the soul to continually determine its own outcomes, but based on knowledge, which is so fundamental to all of Plato's dialogues.
Yeah. Just to comment real quickly in response to, again, I don't see a harmonization with the honoring becoming assertion. I don't think it has anything to do with honoring becoming. I think that's a very egocentric, modernistic kind of take on it. I think Socrates is and Plato is approaching this from a very societal fabric frame point, not from the individual, again, the modernistic Jungian, I can become what I want to become, etc. It's not I, and it's not about becoming. It's about social fabric and the pitfalls therein to, the classic Greek concept of hubris as to exactly man's role in the larger cosmos as created by the one being, whatever that may be.
Well, thank you, and certainly, the fact that we can all have different perspectives and find some common ground in our perspectives, I think is very important. Certainly in the whole construction of the universe that Plato has started to tell us about here in the first part of the Timaeus that we looked at this week. And so I think, this discussion that we've had today is really a good demonstration of that we can all come together with different perspectives and share ideas and discover, hopefully we've discovered knowledge that we didn't have before. We've derived our own knowledge, and I think that's something very important in the whole dialogue process that Plato sets forth, and the fact that we can have different perspectives and different senses of what's important and priorities is so key. And I love reading. I just love rereading the Timaeus, as I said, the third time, because every time I read it, I get something new I hadn't picked up on before. So we're just about to end here. But I wanted to thank everybody for participating in such a great discussion. I think what we'll do in 2 weeks' time is we'll continue on with the rest of the Timaeus. I think it would be natural for us to continue this discussion. There's points that we didn't have a chance to get to. I think others were saying things in the chat box that would be great if we can get some of those points out. And then also just explore the remainder of the logical process that Plato wants to bring us through in considering the construction of a universe that allows for all of us as individuals to do what we're doing now. And again, there's no right or wrong answers. It's great to see so many new people joining us in this dialogue, and everybody is more than welcome. And just so glad that we're able to have this chance to share some time together and to share some knowledge. So I will pass it over to Eva to kind of wrap up today's session, as we're running out of time, unfortunately, but we look forward to resuming our discussion on the Timaeus in 2 weeks. So Eva, over to you.
Thank you, James. This was Dialogues on Plato's Complete Works with James Myers. Thank you for joining today's live class and discussion. It's always exciting to hear the group's comments and questions. I think this would make Plato or Eflatun proud. I'm Eva Ellis. It has been my pleasure to coordinate today's Zoom meetup and the podcast recording. Until next meeting, friends, stay well.